our objective is down at the bottom of the screen here, right? So the first line will change each session. The second two, the bottom two lines will remain the same throughout. Okay, so so our goal for today, so we're going to discuss what makes talking about grading so difficult and get a brief history of grading. The reason for this is to critically examine our own grading practices and to reflect the goal, the success criteria for today and moving forward is that we reflect on equitable grading practices. So the goal is to be reflective. All right. So these are my fellow facilitators, the phenomenal team that is the Tim's team. We'll be taking turns each session playing host. Today I get the honor. So I'm David and welcome. All right. Before we get started, just wanted to get this out, up front here. Oops. Is, it's kind of sort of a statement of good faith. So the purpose of the book study is to facilitate learning and to spark discussion about what's best for students, right? There's no like mandate, there's no big, conspiracy, about the, about grading or about equity or anything like that. We just, chose this book because it was very thought-provoking. And it's not a holy book of education, right? I don't think one exists. Maybe The Art of War by Sun Tzu, I don't know, but you'll find some things that are great in there and some things that you're like, I don't know about that, right? And so just come into it with an open mind. And if it's not for you, treat it like a buffet, right? You probably shouldn't eat everything at the buffet, right? But there might be some really good treats in there. So think of it that way. All right, a few norms to get us started here. Like I said, keep an open mind and an open heart. I hope you'll feel free to share your experiences and to listen to others as well. All right. Seek understanding and seek growth. So, that's kind of the big deal about this is that we can grow and understand together, right? Also monitor your airtime, both in how much you share and how much you don't share, right? So the majority of the sessions will be us in breakout rooms talking about, the different reading. And so, both share, participate, but also limit things so that others can participate and don't just not share. We want you to try to participate. So the next point there is be present and actively participate, especially if you're like driving. I'd rather you be safe and get to the place you want to get to without distractions. So just hang up and get to your place first. That's no hard feelings, right? All right. And then when we get into our breakout rooms, if you can, turn your camera on so it just feels a little more personable. But I get, we're in different places and in different situations. So, do your best to participate in that sense. Okay. The district has come up with this definition of educational equity. So Dr. Catherine Taylor led a team to develop this. So we wanted to make sure we posted it here more as a resource for all of you to have and use. So there is that posted. All right. And a few logistics here. All right. So the one thing we want to kind of drill into is Google Classroom is going to be the hub. So that's where we'll do most of the communication and turning in of things and things like that. So if you haven't done so, join that Google Classroom, though I think you had to join to get to the Zoom. So, all right. You'll get an hour and a half of pay for actively participating in the virtual meeting. You'll get another hour and a half of pay for reading, completing, and submitting the assignments in between the virtual meetings, right? These will be due July 28th. So you have until then to, get your thoughts together and submit it. More on that in a little bit. But please make sure you hit the turn in button in Google Classroom, or the mark as done button in Google Classroom. That's what we're going to go over or go through for your hour and a half pay for reading, right? That's what we're going to go from to submit paperwork. So make sure you hit the turn in button or mark it as done. All right. Our plan is to submit the timesheets on August 5th. So we hope that'll be reflected, in September. If not, you can expect it sometime after that. But that's when our plan to submit the paperwork will be. Okay. All right. So our assignments look like this. If you joined our book study last year, might look a little familiar. It's so these are posted in Google Classroom under each session, right? And these are reflective primarily. So you'll have three options, right? Each option asks you to reflect the same way. So the prompt is to take at least one set of the questions to consider from the end of the chapter of any of the chapters that you read. So for today, you're reading chapters 1 and 2. And so you're going to take the questions from one of those two chapters. You don't have to do both, though you can if you want, but at least one of those and answer them. And you can answer them either on a Padlet, and that lends itself to a discussion, so you can see what everyone says, so everyone will see what you're saying, right, on the Padlet. You can go on Flipgrid and record yourself answering those questions, and for that one, others will also see that, so it also lends itself towards a discussion. If what you want to say is more private and more for your own reflection, there is a Google form that you can fill out and answer and reflect in that way. And only the hosts have the facilitators have access, right? So because we have to get this submitted to payroll for paperwork, purposes, we have to close it all on July 28th. Okay, so be mindful of that. Okay. All right, so really quick, this was in the prologue, if you've gotten to that, but there's these two charts. These are 3 math teachers and 3 English teachers. Basically, same curriculum, same assessments. The assessments are even grouped or graded as a group. In the chat, what do you notice? All right, let's go ahead and throw some ideas there in the chat. What are some things that are you're noticing? Yeah. Okay, see, notice the teachers are grading differently, large disparities. Yeah, there's a variety. Yeah, no D's or F's in some. There's inconsistency. Good. Yeah. All right. Okay, good. So yeah, keep those coming, and we'll be moving along here. So these are a few things that were true in all classes, right? Similar students, similar standardized tests, similar instruction, same curriculum, same assessments, and team scored assessments, yet the variety of how things were being graded was different, right? Down to like one teacher who took points off for the paper on the edges, right? And that had an impact. right? Among other things, right? So the goal of what we wanted to do here, and the goal of the book too, is to consider what's best for students, really for all students, right? And so we're going to jump into chapter 1, and that is the difficult question: what makes grading so difficult to talk about, and even harder to change? And it's the elephant in the room. By the way, I'm in Alabama, so I thought I'd give a shout out to the my SEC fans and friends out there. But yeah, it's this elephant in the room, right? That it's kind of hard to talk about. And Feldman calls it an island of autonomy. So he talks about the external pressures and expectations that we have that in our job. There's this one island of autonomy that we have, and he calls it the declaration of our professional judgment of student performance. And it's the most concrete symbol of our authority and expertise.
I have to go to the pharmacy before I go home.
That makes it difficult to talk about. Right? So, by the way, I forgot to set the when you come in that you'll be muted. So if you come in, be mindful. You don't say anything you don't want us to hear, right? Or just make sure you're muted. All right. And then he goes into this idea of like this web of belief, right? And as the metaphor goes, you can think about our belief system like this web. And if something gets disrupted in that web, or maybe even torn down in that web, there's this there's this desire to want to rebuild it exactly the same, right? But in keeping an open mind, or in angel's stance, as he calls it, also, or in angel's advocate stance, we could think about rebuilding those disrupted webs stronger, right? Maybe not exactly the way they were, but making them even stronger. All right. And then he's going to go into the technical, how, right, as well as the theoretical, which is the why of grading. So he talks about how to implement more equitable grading practices and thinking about the changes that need to be made. He'll give us successful and concrete examples, and tells us to be mindful that there will be struggles and successes. Some things might not work really well, and then other times things will work. But just because it doesn't work the first time doesn't mean we shouldn't go back and try to fix things, right? And try things again, right? So and then there's the theoretical side of this, right? The why certain grading practices are the way they are. And when we think about these, we will probably notice that there are inequities. So when we take a step back and look at these things, we'll see, we'll see how more equitable practices can actually improve assessments, curriculum design, and even the instructional decisions that we make from day to day in our work. The book is organized like this. Today we're going to just cover the foundations section, so chapters 1 and 2. The next couple of times we're going to look at the author's argument for why there needs to be a change, right? So we'll look at current practices and inequities in that. He'll also offer a few proposals for more equitable grading. And then the third part is the one that has the most practical things. So here are some things to try, right? And we'll spend the last couple of weeks looking at that, all right? So there's the breakup. Speaking of the equitable grading practices, this is like a snapshot of the categories that he talks about. Just two that I'd like to highlight. One is the concept of asking how accurate and mathematically sound our grading practices are. As a teacher in the humanities, I didn't like doing a whole lot of math when calculating grades. And so I never really thought about it until I had read this book a couple of years ago, and it kind of hit me in the face, like, oh man, what am I thinking with these things? The other thing is the image in the middle, the lifting the veil on how to succeed. Our district has had this new kind of motivating push towards the core instructional model, and part of an essential part of that is having a clear daily objective, right? And that's really great. John Hattie's research in the Visible Learning Index, I believe is the name of his book. Some of the research that he's done, and one of the conclusions that he's come up with is that if students know exactly what is expected of them, why, and how to achieve it on a daily basis, the rate of learning can more than double over time. So if you think about that, think about having a way that your students' learning can more than double, right, over time. According to his research, having a clear objective, to put it in a nutshell, that'll do it. So anyway, so more on that in weeks to come. All right, so I've been talking way too much here already, so I'm gonna throw you into some breakout rooms, and if you're following along, here's the questions. Just find the bright orange slide, so you'll have access to these. And it says, where and when did your beliefs about grading begin to form? Who taught you how to grade, and when was that? Have those ideas changed since? And probably more importantly, this is kind of the thing I'm most interested in. What brings you to this book study, and what are some of the goals for reading this book? All right, so I'm gonna throw you into some breakout rooms here.
What were the sizes of our groups supposed to be, David?
3 or 4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It just felt really intimate. I was just making sure.
Oh, good. Intimate in a good way, I hope.
Yeah, it just felt I think I just wasn't ready for the intimacy of our conversation.
Gotcha. Sorry.
No worries.
That's what we're gonna go for, though, about 3 to 4 there. So, all right, let's have a quick debrief. We have everyone back, I think. Like I said, it's been a minute since I've played on Zoom here, so I don't see any participants here. So if I could invite maybe 1 or 2 people to unmute, and then let us know what you talked about. What was a takeaway from your breakout session?
So in my session, we talked a lot about how college syllabi or syllabi presented by colleagues was one of the main ways we thought about our grading systems. And that how when we ourselves were students, a lot of times we did not question the grading systems, but that we do like how, since we're moving to a more standardized system, a 4-point grading system would be more equitable for our students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Our group talked about how we were graded as kids affected what we thought about grades, and may have changed over time, but that was kind of like how we all started initially, was what did we experience ourselves as kids?
Yeah, no, great.
I'm really curious to know if anyone actually was taught explicitly how to grade or a system of grading.
That's a great question. Yeah, anybody want to chime in?
I know I wasn't.
I actually shared that in our session, that I was never explicitly taught, even in my teacher ed courses. Arguably, I went to college a really long time ago, but I kind of picked it up on the fly. I went by how I was graded as a student, and through talking with my teacher friends, but I was never explicitly taught.
Yeah.
I was through a rubric. So they used a rubric for everything. And then, you know, the rubric, a 1 through 4 rubric, you know, being that you just, the Fs or whatever. And so everything that we had, everything when I went to my credentialing program, we had to provide a rubric, right? And then they would say, well, okay, so if you got a 2, then that's your C, right? And 3's your B. So that's how they taught me in English.
Yeah.
I wasn't taught either how to grade. I actually, believe it or not, I use my student experience on how to grade students, because I was always the type of student that if I earned a 36 out of 40, I wanted to know why it wasn't a 40 out of 40. Not because of my perfectionism. I can be a perfectionist, but that's not the reason. I always felt that if a student earns a certain mark, there should be comments, like there should be a reason why this was off, because that helps the student see, oh, you know what, I made a mistake there. Because a lot of times, like in my group, I was very blessed to work with different women at different levels, because I'm going to be starting clinical practice in fall. So it was nice to have that experience to be able to say, okay, well, the reason why I have to know a rubric is because we need to be accountable for the reason why. Like, it shouldn't be based on your feelings. It shouldn't be based on, oh, they did okay. It's what is the standard? Like, what should they know before doing an assignment? Because that's super helpful to know what is expected of you. And if you're having an issue, is your teacher willing to like help you through that issue, or is it, oh, go and do it on your own? So it really all depends on who's educating you and their willingness to walk through you with the process. And luckily I've had both. And then also the difference between being in a program versus being in real life, because I, you know, doing my program and then being in long-term substitute, they're worlds apart. They're not even connected at all. Like, what you see in your program is different from what you do in real life, and then finding the balance.
We in our group also briefly talked about how these questions kind of negate the fact that our students also teach us how to grade. Like, them not needing the discussion, oh, I lost these 4 points, why did I lose these 4 points? Or talk about the types of comments that they need. And as we grow as educators and we collaborate, part of our grading comes from collaborating with our students and understanding or learning to understand what they do and do not understand as part of our grading system.
Yeah, these are all great conversations. This yeah, I'm sorry we interrupted them, but there will be lots more opportunities to discuss in breakout rooms and also in the homework assignments. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
You know, also in our
one more,
group,
Anna, go ahead and then we'll move on. Yeah.
also in our group, we also talked about how the connection was in school, we learned how to grade. But also we realized that there's a connection just out in the world with the same grading system. Like if you go to a restaurant, you're looking for that A grade. You're not looking for an F grade and go, yes, I need to go to that restaurant. So it's just something that's almost like music, where it's understood universally what these grades stand for at the same time. So it's not just or only in school, but it's something all around us and all around the students. And we're all collectively taking it in and identifying what this grade level means and what that grade level means.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and that is actually a great segue into the next part of our book here. Chapter 2 is a brief history of grading. And this was something I had never really even thought about until I read this book for the first time. And you know, like, where did we come up with these things? And so right at the get-go, Feldman says, you know, at the beginning of the chapter, it turns out that our current grading practices were designed over 100 years ago, responding to the needs of the United States in the early 20th century, and intending to solve problems in that specific context, right? And didn't really change with the times. And so so what I'm gonna, I'm gonna again give a quick overview of the chapter. The chapter is probably one of my favorite chapters of the book, just because I I never knew these, the connection from the Industrial Revolution to like today, and how grades, came about because of that. So, I'm going to give it to you in a nutshell in case you haven't read it, or to jog your memory. But if you haven't read it, if nothing else, it's probably the shortest chapter in the book, and it's pretty fascinating. At least I thought. So, over the past 100 years, these are some of the big changes that impacted American society, right? And he goes over each of those. So prior to the 1800s, most education happened sort of at home, right? Parents would be the ones educating children. And in the early 1800s, that's when, like schools were a little starting to be more formalized. And about 50% of white children were able to go to a school, right? And the school calendar was on average 78 days. So if you can think of that, like, wow, how crazy would that be? How much can you get accomplished in 78 days, right? And it would be in a single room. So, multiple age ranges learning alongside each other in one room. And as it sounds, it was geared towards here. And then comes the turn of the century, and American productivity boomed because of a rise in manufacturing, right? Factories were behind this boom in productivity, and they became the primary employers. And then as the primary employers, they put pressure on schools and school boards to prepare future employees, which makes sense, right? And so what happened in schools, right? They became specialized. There was a chain of command. Timed routines and efficiency were all valued because those were things that were valued in a factory, right? When we think about specialization, we have grade levels, different subjects for us in secondary, right? Chain of command, where you have a superintendent, principal, vice principal, teacher, student, like there's a clear chain of command. Timed routines, i.e. periods, or, scheduled lunches, scheduled beginning and ending times, things like that. And then, idea of efficiency. And then there was the migration that happened because of that, right? There were people moved from rural areas into cities, and factory where the factory jobs were. And then there was this need for transportation, and the factories created those, transportations. And this is just a quick visual here of just how cities grew, early 20th century here, like, or in the late 19th century, I should say. So in 1820, there were 4 cities with populations of 25,000. Just a few decades later, there were 35. So this, and then it just kept growing exponentially. And so that, of course, impacted schools. And then there was this need for efficiency and accountability, right? Single letter grades came from this too, and then this idea of norm reference grades and bell curves, which the book goes into, and we can take a closer look at that, when you read through it. And want to take a quick detour, because I kind of thought, like, okay, well, where did even the letter system come from? And so this is the guy who you can thank for this, thank or shake your fist at. I don't know how you feel about it, but William Farish was a tutor at Cambridge, and he's the one who kind of gets credited for the A through F way of grading in schools. So this process already existed in factories, and he specifically, he got the idea from a shoe factory to see if shoes were up to grade. So grade A shoes were the best, and this is a quick way of assessing and ranking shoes. And so his job was as a tutor at Cambridge. And so he thought he could be more efficient at grading or sorting students or you know, the students that he was tutoring if he assigned letter grades to them. So you know, it wasn't because he had students' best interests in mind. It was because he could be more efficient at sorting students, and he was paid by student. So this is a way to you know, make more money. You know, and that's where it, you know, that's where he came up with it. And then I believe Harvard was the first school to adopt it. And then, you know, if Harvard did it, then everybody else wants to do it too, right? And so it just expanded that way. And then, you know, why is there no E, right? I don't know if you ever thought about that. I always thought that, well, E could be excellent, so we don't want to cause any confusion. Guess I was right. That's why there's no E. So it's an A, B, C, D, and F. So anyway, a little bit of history on that too. That was interesting. Then came the 20th century, and I hazard a guess that the vast majority of people on this call were educated during the 20th century, as was I, right? So I don't know, does this ring a bell, right? This idea of tracking, using IQ tests in schools, and having work tracks, college tracks, and then socioeconomic and racial hierarchies being established and being embedded into the system. Some would argue that, you know, this still exists, right? So so that's the 20th century. And then today, right, grades still can be or often rather associated with obedience and compliance, right? This idea of assimilation and becoming a good citizen, you know, that's still something in grading. Ideas of sorting and ranking and how a bell curve is what you want to see, right? You don't want to have too many kids failing, and you don't want to have too many kids passing. Just the right amount would be good, right? That, you know, that's this idea that, you know, that's what makes it good, right? And then, you know, like we've said already, you know, this idea of tracking students in vocations and you know, or college, right? Making that distinction that if it's not one, you know, you probably belong here, or you belong here, and removing opportunities, right? So you know, and that's in a nutshell, very quick. I really didn't do it justice. I think this is a great chapter to read on your own if you haven't done so yet. But there's a quick crash course in the history of grading, right? So which brings us to that survey we gave you at the beginning, right? You know, we weren't trying to track like who believes what or anything like that. This is just for so you could have something to prime your mind, right? So the first question here asked, in the categories comprising your grade, how much do you weigh homework, right? And maybe some of you were like, I don't assign homework. I don't see a place for that. But the question was, which of these options is seems the most equitable, right? And the correct answer, I guess, it would be less than 5%. And chapter 10 will give us more about that concept there. So, and then there was this statement of agreeing and not agreeing, right, about whether or not behavior should be included in a grade. According to the options there, grades are less accurate and behavior is included in the grade, right? So if you don't stop talking, I'm going to take 5 points, right? Like that objectively makes your grades less accurate, right? Chapters 4, 9, and 13 will elaborate on that if you want to read ahead and see what, you know, what he has to say about that. And again, I just want to emphasize that this is a book and one person's a set of ideas, right? So I'm not pushing this on anybody, but food for thought, right? And then the third question, in your classroom, what happens if a student fails a summative assessment, right? Which of those options that were given? Well, the most equitable option would be the student has the option to retake the assessment or a version of the assessments, right? Because they might memorize the answers or something like that, and replace the previous score with the new score. So, no penalty. You didn't know it before. Now you know it. The grade reflects that you know it. Chapters 8 and 11 will elaborate on that concept. All right. The next question was, which do you believe about your grading? Gave you a bunch of options about, the bell curve idea, right? So grades are based on external standards. So there is no minimum or maximum number of students who can qualify for a grade. So you shouldn't, according to, equity as it's described in this book, and, kind of just in general, shouldn't have a maximum number of A's or a minimum number of F's or something like that, right? And in my past, I've known some dastardly people who pride themselves on how no one passes their class, and I'm like, that sounds like a you problem, sir or ma'am, right? on more ways than one, but there's that. Chapter 2, as we, if you look into the history of grading, we'll elaborate on that further. And then question 5 asked, what mathematics or scales do you use, or does your software use, to calculate a student's performance over time? And of those options, there were 2 correct answers, or 2 more equitable answers. So one said that if student earns a higher score on content than they had in earlier, then replace that, like we talked about that earlier. And using a 0 to 4 or A through F scale. What? A through F? I use that. What? That's not new. Well, it can be equitable. Chapters 7 and 8 will address that if you want to jump into that ahead of time. And then finally, why do you include a participation grade, if at all, in your grades, right? So according to Feldman, you should never include participation as a part of your grade, right? And chapters 9 and 13 will elaborate on that if you want to take a closer look at that. All right. So Cami, if you wouldn't mind setting up the breakout rooms in just a second here, as we'll come up here. Here's the next question, right, that we can discuss in groups. And if you want to set this up, ahead of time, like I know some groups wanted the questions in there. So if you want to open this up in Google Classroom, it's already there. So you can open that up and have that ready for yourself. Or you can write them down or take a picture of the questions if you have them. But then I'll also post them into the chat for everyone too. But the question is, or there's 2. How do you see the ideas and beliefs of the early 20th century manifesting themselves through your school's communication, curriculum, instruction, policies, and/or grading? Or, if you're like, I don't know what the school says, but here's my classroom, right? Then answer it that way. And then also, that survey, may have ruffled some feathers, may have ruffled your own feathers. Share your thoughts on the Grading for Equity survey. Yeah. All right. So
they're set for 15 minutes, and you'll get a 2-minute warning when it's time to come back.
Virtual high five, Cami. Thank you. All right. So welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good discussion here. So once again, just like before, you get 1 or 2 volunteers to share how your conversation went in your breakout room. You can just go ahead.
I'll share for my group. Our group was fun. We talked a lot, and we were kind of all over the place in just saying, like, a lot of the things that we've seen in the book so far, like, they make sense, but then are like, we can find 15 different reasons why we're not sure about it, or you know, like we talked about that difference between like we having that heart for kids and wanting to show so much grace and like take care of our babies, but then like hold them to mastery, right? And so sometimes we'll use something like participation or extra credit to help our kids that we know might be going through like crazy stuff and that stuff that's out of their control. And then we just want to help them and we think we're helping them, but then if we're not looking for mastery, are we hurting them in the long run? And we were just really all over the place. So we don't have any, we didn't, but it was a great discussion.
Yeah, and that's kind of the heart of the book. I forgot to mention it's the textbook at Cal State Bakersfield now for the assessment course. So it's a class I teach in the credential program, and I always let the students know that, like, kind of like I said earlier, this is no like holy book of teaching, right? But ultimately, we're living on autonomy island when it comes to grading. But yeah, it's at least it sparks a good conversation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Anna?
Yeah. In our group, we talked about a lot of different things, but we did focus on understanding the difference between what's equal and equality and what's equitable. And even also having the students to understand that too. So as part of the objective, the students understand where you're coming from and what one thing means over the other. And just having that equity in the classroom where you are scaffolding the information and differentiating the way that you're teaching. And I think one of the teachers, forgive me, who shared that they had a student who was blind. And well, what do we do in that situation? If you give everybody a book, I'm being equal, but that doesn't help the student that can't see the words. Now, if I give them a Braille book, now it's equitable. And I am giving you the resources that you need to get to the standard. It's not a question of moving the standard one way or another, but I'm giving everybody what they would need to acquire that objective or that standard.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it reminds me of, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the little cartoon of the kids trying to watch a baseball game, and there's like these boxes, and then if you give everyone a box, it still doesn't help the shortest kid, and so you share the boxes. And yeah, so that's a great point. Thanks. Yeah, we got time for a couple more, actually. So if
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
So our group, when we talked about the participation component, we're like, what does participation mean in the context of in this book, in this text? Somebody had seen some stuff in there. Since you're a little bit more familiar with it, when they refer to participation, are they referring to just butts in the seat, showing up for class, following the classroom rules? Or are they talking about actively participating in discussion activities and group projects?
Yeah, well, I think it's the question. Let me rephrase your question, because I think what he means by not including participation grade in the grade is more the grade should be reflective of mastery or proficiency or mastery. So if showing proficiency means they participate in a discussion because that's what you're assessing, then that's what that means. But I think in a nutshell, what he probably means by the bad participation would be like, you came to class today and you sat in your desk, participation, or you didn't disrupt today, you get 10 points for that, like that kind of thing.
Okay,
that's a feeling I got. That's the same feeling I got about that. And generally my participation grades are not based on that kind of participation, which is one of the other reasons why I found it difficult when I was completing the survey. I don't define, for me, my participation grades that way. When I say participation, maybe the more accurate way to define it is completion. Like, do they complete the task? And so maybe it's in, sometimes it's in the language that we use, I think. But I think the majority of teachers that I've known, over my, being a kid and 24 years in the district, a lot of times if you see participation, for me, it's a red flag, because are they being graded on exactly what you mentioned earlier? I really have been fighting myself on how to be more equitable. I've tried many different modes, and I'm really excited about this book and, having discussions with all of you too. So, but thank you.
Yeah.
So,
No, go ahead.
I think grades are a lot more complicated than when I was in school.
How so?
Well, when I was in school, teachers had to calculate grades by hand, and I can only remember one teacher who ever used category grades, because if you sat there and had to calculate category grades by hand, it takes a long time to do that.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
And so they didn't. I mean, it just seems like we have a lot of options that people maybe 40, 50, or 40 years ago didn't use, because they were going to have to do it without a computer. We put it into the computer, and the computer kicks out a grade when we put in categories, but they had to sit there and do it all by hand, and that's a big difference.
Yeah, that's true. You would think that the computer grading something would be more objective and accurate. But it's like a complicated formula, especially GPA, and don't get me started on GPA, but that's just a me thing.
Well, it's one of the things we talked about too, because when we came back from our discussion from chapter 1, someone said, talked about the restaurant grading and how we all universally know what grades mean. And then we were talking about it isn't actually a universal scale, because if it was universal, students wouldn't have questions about the grading. So we think it's a universal scale, but it's not actually a universal scale.
Yeah.
I think just on the issue of weighted grades, is that PowerSchool does not help with that, because it doesn't show students and parents how students are doing in individual categories. It just averages it all out. And so when students are thinking about, well, where am I successful and where am I not successful, PowerSchool's not helping with that, because it just shows them sort of an amalgamation or an average rather than how they're doing by category.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I have a question.
Yep.
In chapter 1 on page 11, he talks about the not giving zeros. Can you a little further? Because I'm not understanding that.
Yeah, so it's, I think it's chapter 13, 12 or 13. So later he'll elaborate on how that actually works. But here's a nutshell. If you do a 0 to 4 scale on everything, that makes everything equitable, right? So 4 means mastery, 0 means not yet, right? The way our grades are broken up, it's not like A, B, C, D, there's F also, right? And so it doesn't work out. So 25% or even 50% doesn't mean almost proficient, right? It's still an F. So his the way, mathematically, the way it works is if you don't give any zeros, if all zeros are 50%, it works out mathematically to a 4-point scale. It doesn't mean that you're giving free points. It means that it adds up mathematically to a 4-point scale. And I didn't, it's a little complicated, but he goes into it in the last section of the book, in one of the ways that one of the equitable grading practices that he offers. And then in the second part, he makes a pretty, I think is a pretty good argument for why, the house of F is so large, and why it shouldn't be, right? From 0
Right.
all the way to like 60, or 0 to
59
is an F, and then everything else is 10, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah, and so he's like, well, why don't we just make it out of 4, And so anyway, you'll have to read. I think he explains it much more eloquently than I just did. But
you know what? That's one of the conversations we had in our breakout group, because I mean, like I said, I've tried a lot of different things. And one of the arguments was, well, what about the kids that you try to, influence and get to do things? And because I talked about the case against Fs and that whole 59% deep F. And so I said, well, I did, that was my hitch with it. And then I'm like, I'm going to try it with a 0. So but usually I can sit down with most kids and even convince them to do one thing, but that doesn't solve the 0 through 59 issue. Yeah. So I like the idea. I didn't initially like the idea of a 4-point scale, but if we can translate that into a grade that people understand, and if we can be consistent with it, I have no problem with it.
There you go. Yeah.
So Keiko, what would you do though with a student who missed, let's say 40% of the class they were absent?
So I'm gonna pin that because we got 1 more minute left, and that's the question to consider. Like that is one issue to consider, and he addresses it in there too. So when you get to, I think it's chapter 12 or 13, he'll give you some ideas there. So really quick, just want to show you before we dismiss here. Remember to go into Google Classroom. You'll find the Zoom link there, and a recording for today will be there also. So this whole thing, give us a kind of some grace. We're on summer vacation too, so might not be there immediately. So give us some time, and we'll have the recording there for you. And just gonna leave you with this. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Just a quote to leave you with as we end our time together about rethinking some of our practices. All right. So sorry to cut you off there, but I wanted to make sure I dismiss everyone. But we can keep talking. Like I've got all night. So if you want to keep the discussion going. But everyone else, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, you can post them in Google Classroom or email us directly. Thank you for joining.
I was here from the beginning to the end. We don't sign anything, sign in, we're good to go?
No, Zoom is taking attendance for us, so we're going to get an attendance sheet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, David. See you soon.